Joel Embiid had 70 freaking points, and just to make that even more ridiculous, in the same night, Karl-Anthony Towns finished the game with 62 points. This is the first time since 1978 that two players have had 60 points in the same night. That being in the past, David Thompson, actually ironically having a 70 piece himself, and who's the other fucking guy? George Gervin. Hello everybody, welcome to Ask Rusty Buckets. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second. It makes a massive difference in how this video performs in the YouTube algorithm, so it is much appreciated. You know, I would say with the crazy volume of scoring that has been happening in the NBA, and specifically the Embiid and Karl-Anthony Towns game from last night, some would say that offense has perhaps gone a little bit too far in the NBA. Someone should really make a video on that topic, I think. Maybe about an hour long on a YouTube channel called Rusty Buckets with the link in the description. Something like that. Anyways, moving on, let's go ahead and talk about this game. I'm also going to be talking, I'm going to talk about the Sixers versus Spurs game, the Hornets versus Timberwolves game, and then we're also going to be talking about this Terry Rozier trade to the Miami Heat. First things first, we're going to talk about Embiid and his 70 piece. You know, this was a fairly, at least I'd say, standard approach in terms of how Embiid got his offense. It was just at an even higher volume than the already ridiculous volume that he's been averaging on the year. He is averaging more points per game than he is minutes, and he's actually averaging more points per minute than Wilt Chamberlain did in his 50-point per game season. So that's just to give you an idea of how ridiculous Embiid has been in terms of his efficiency of putting points on the board. In this game, he managed to get a couple of more minutes and scored even more points per game per minute in this one. The Spurs really didn't have any answer for him, regardless of what defender they put on him. Wemby did his best, but you know, the criticisms of him not having the weight to deal with centers like Embiid or Jokic is accurate, and there were more than one possessions in this game where Embiid just completely bodied Wemby. If you didn't see it before the game, there is this really interesting clip where Embiid walked up to Wemby and kind of sized him up, because, you know, from his perspective, I'm 7'1", how the hell is anyone taller than me? But, you know, I guess he sized him up and said, yeah, I can give this guy 70 points. But it was the pretty typical attack, you know, face-ups, mid-range shots, putting his shoulder into people and just being able to be stronger than everybody else on the court. Didn't rely too much on foul baiting in this one. In fact, I'd say pretty much every time he got to the line, it was entirely legitimate. I think he hit one three-pointer, but otherwise everything was just him cooking inside the arc and the post, being bigger than everybody and having really good touch on that mid-range shot. I do think that his mid-range game is probably the most underrated aspect of his game. I think we all pretty much universally know he's pretty good at it, but it really just opens up everything for him, because when it comes to stopping him, like, sure, you'd rather him take a mid-range shot than get good positioning, but he's also good enough at it that you want to get a contest on that mid-range shot. So it's like, what are you going to concede? Either way, he's probably going to get some sort of good look on any given possession. And even if you don't give him a good look, if you just slightly are out of position, he will manipulate that into getting to the free throw line. It's just ridiculous what Embiid has been this year. Offensively speaking, there's really nobody that can stop him. It's hard to even think of an option for someone who could truly stop him, at the very least in the regular season. I really hope he ends up meeting the threshold to play the proper amount of games, because he's absolutely the MVP this year, and I hate it when a guy wins an MVP on a technicality over someone who otherwise should have won it. So hopefully Embiid meets that 65 game threshold, and I think he will, unless he sustains some sort of injury that's outside of his control. I definitely, you know, we've definitely got the impression in the past that Embiid is somebody that likes MVP awards, we'll say. I also feel like, and this was in my hot takes video, I feel like this will be the year that Embiid finally isn't bad in the postseason. Now, I'm not expecting him to take the Sixers all the way to a championship because, truthfully, Embiid could be as good as he is in the regular season throughout the entire postseason, and I still would think that the Celtics and the Bucks are better and the Nuggets are better, and so I don't necessarily think the Sixers would go all the way even with Embiid not choking. However, they can definitely go further than they have before, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw this team in the conference finals. I don't know, maybe it's just the system that Nick Nurse has implemented or a different energy that Embiid has brought to the floor this year, but it just really feels like the Embiid choking in the playoffs thing is ready to be done with, and for the sake of his legacy, I hope that it is, especially if he ends up winning 2 MVPs, because if he wins back-to-back MVPs and then chokes in the playoffs back-to-back after already having a history of choking in the playoffs, gotta say, his reputation isn't going to be pretty, and he'll be aging out to the point where the best case scenario is he gets like a Dirk 2011 run to make up for everything else in his career. But otherwise, that's probably not going to happen. My overarching point, Embiid is very good. He's probably been the best player in the NBA this season in terms of just production. I don't think there's any doubt in terms of individual production who the best player in the league has been. Definitely the MVP. To quickly talk about the Spurs end of things, offensively speaking, Wemby had a pretty good game. I believe he had, 33 points in this one? Oh, another cool fact that I neglected to mention about the 70 piece from Embiid and the 60 piece from Cat is that this date, when it happened, January 22nd, was the 18-year anniversary of Kobe scoring 81 points. That's also something I neglected to mention. Embiid totally could have gotten to that number of points in this game, but Nick Nurse only played him 36 minutes, and he didn't play him for the fourth quarter in its entirety when he very easily could have and gotten those extra 12 points to get the second highest scoring performance in NBA history. But he did not do that. 36 minutes is already 2 more minutes than he normally gets, so this man scored basically 2 points per minute. Also got 18 rebounds and 5 assists. I think after the game, they said he was the only other player besides MJ to have 60 plus points, 15 plus rebounds, and 5 plus assists in a game. He was surprised that Wilt hadn't done that, as was I, because it seems like Wilt owns all of those ridiculous stats. But yeah, back to the Spurs end of things. As I mentioned, Wemby with 33 points, 7 rebounds, 2 blocks, really efficient. He's been on a tear. Also played almost 30 minutes, which is big for him. I hope people aren't too critical of Wemby. I haven't really seen the discourse too much around this game. I don't think Embiid dropping 70 is really all that indicative of what Wemby is going to be as a defensive player in the future, but it definitely highlighted what will ultimately be his biggest weakness. I do think people overhype and overrate the importance of being a big player and act like someone being skinny is just the end-all be-all of them being an effective player and an effective defensive player, but it is definitely not a positive thing. It is definitely something that can be a problem at times, and it was very much a problem for him today. Moving on to the Hornets versus Bobcats game. Moving on to the Hornets versus Timberwolves. I was just thinking of like winter creatures. Yeah, Hornets versus Timberwolves, not a game you would expect to be particularly exciting. Also, I gotta say, Karl-Anthony Towns, not a player I would expect to be getting 60 points in 2024. To be fair to Cat, like, we had that video that was kind of critical of him and suggesting that the Timberwolves need to trade him to really break out to the next level. And pretty much ever since that video came out, he's been awesome for Minnesota. So discount that criticism, and you can discount it here with this 60 piece. Although something that is kind of funny about this 60 piece is that Cat almost kind of appeared like a loser at the end of this one, because he set the record for points in the first half. Obviously, that's an insane thing to do. 44 points, finished the game with 62, had 10 three-pointers. However, he got benched in the fourth late, not for long, but still, it happened. And he scored, I believe, 4 points in the fourth quarter on like 2 for 11 shooting, had a bunch of turnovers, and ultimately was him trying to go get the record, him trying to like really get up there to 70 points, didn't work for him. So the 70 points, we could have almost had 270 pieces in one game. In one day. It was very achievable. Didn't happen though. And it's just very weird to think that like it's kind of like, I don't know what the psychology of it is. It's kind of like if you watch a movie that's good, but the ending is bad, you know, the last thing that you experience of the game is kind of what impression you get left with. And if you just watch the last couple of minutes of this game, you would not have a high opinion of Karl-Anthony Towns. You certainly wouldn't have felt like you were watching somebody who had 60 points in the game. But nevertheless, he did. Unfortunately for him though, didn't walk away with the win because the Charlotte Hornets put together a very solid performance here. LaMelo Ball was not all that efficient. Not that that's anything new for him, but he did have 13 assists to 1 turnover, which is efficient. PJ Washington hit some big shots late in this game. I think 2 3-pointers in that fourth quarter. Miles Bridges was good, but fuck him. And Brandon Miller, 27 points on 11 for 13 shooting, also getting some clutch buckets, hit a really clutch mid-range shot in the last couple of minutes of this game. Yeah, I don't have much to say about this one. Unfortunate for Cat that's how that went, because if I had 60 points and then I got benched late in the fourth, I'd feel some type of way about it, that's for sure. All right, last but not least, we're going to talk about Terry Rozier being traded to the Miami Heat in exchange for Kyle Lowry and a 2027 first-round pick. That first-round pick has a lottery protection on it, and if that pick ends up being in the lottery, it will convey entirely unprotected in 2028, which I think, given the timeline of the Miami Heat, could actually be a decent pick for the Charlotte Hornets if it ends up going that way. That said, the Hornets did trade their 5th leading franchise scorer for essentially a salary dump and a very far in the future first-round pick that may not even end up being all that good. So I definitely don't think this was an amazing return for the Hornets, but it was definitely a good opportunity for the Heat to buy pretty low. Obviously, this is not the same as getting Damian Lillard. However, instead of trading all of your young players and all of your picks for Dame, instead keeping those young players who have all contributed really solidly this year, having most of your draft capital in the future, and getting Terry Rozier, I don't know that it's equal to having Dame, but it's not nearly as bad as a lot of people acted like it was for the Heat going into this year. I think Jaime Jaquez and even Nikola Jovic has been really good for them as of late. So yeah, that's something to be excited about if you're a Heat fan. The first thing that really came to mind when I heard about this rumor, because this was rumored for a couple of days before it happened, part of me was like, I don't know how much they need Terry, because he kind of is the same archetype of player that Tyler Hero is, and Tyler Hero and Terry Rozier are generally an archetype of player that I don't want much to do with, let alone having 2 of them. However, first of all, if there's any environment that can make that work, it's going to be Miami. But also, I then considered what Terry Rozier has been as more of a role player on a good team in the past, like with the Boston Celtics. And, you know, sometimes he would have a tendency to overshoot in that environment too, but then again, who didn't on those Celtics teams? But I think he can dial back his shot selection, definitely be more of a role player on the offensive end, be a solid playmaker, all things considered. And then defensively, he's had times in his career where he was a pretty damn good defender despite being undersized. And I think especially in Miami, if there were any place where he would do that, it would be there. So I think this will work out for Miami. I think it's a pretty low risk deal. That 2028 pick could end up being like catastrophically bad, but I wouldn't bet on it. And yeah, Terry Rozier is a solid NBA player, definitely an upgrade over Kyle Lowry, and this definitely gives them more talent. It also gives them more shot creation, which is something that I've talked about with Miami being an area of weakness for them. Not that they don't have shot creation, but rather they just don't have enough players that can do it. But now you've got Jimmy, Tyler, Bam even does a little bit of shot creation. You have Rozier now. Jaime can do it a good bit. I think it's a solid deal. I think it's a decent trade for the Hornets. I feel like you could have waited a little bit longer and got something better than this, but it's also not the end of the world. And the Heat got a big improvement in their backcourt and in their scoring department, all while not sacrificing really much. Kyle Lowry was a stabilizing force for the Heat. However, I don't necessarily feel like the Heat need too many stabilizing forces. I think they've got enough stability as it is. And really, it was just better to go with a guy who maybe is a little bit more volatile, but that volatility also means that he can bring it a little bit higher than Kyle Lowry can on your average night. Zach LaVine rumors, increasing expectation Bulls will not trade star by NBA deadline. I'm not surprised by that, really. Market for him completely dried up, and the Bulls going on a run as soon as he was injured, like, immediately proved my theory that, like, that's just not a winning play style. So, like, the rest of the league was like, okay, if he doesn't win us games and he costs $45 million, why the fuck would we trade for him? So I'm not surprised at all that Zach will probably stick around. Also, I did want to not sarcastically promote the main channel video. If you're sticking around at this point, I appreciate you a ton. And if you haven't yet, I would really appreciate it if you would go check out our newest main channel video discussing offense in the NBA and if it has gone too far, if there are things the league should do to change it. Spoiler alert, I think it has. So yeah, top link in the description, pin comment, all that. I'd really appreciate it if you gave that video a watch. Me and Rudy put a ton of work into it. But that is it. Shout out to Nick for editing this video. Check out his Coping Hour podcast. That'll be the second link, 2 fingers, not one, Jacob. The second link in the description. But that is it. Goodbye.